Hi everybody, and welcome to this webinar on the General Product Safety Regulation. This is an update because we previously did a webinar on this earlier in the year when lovely Rutger went through the GPSR, but we're doing a bit of an update today. I'm going to quickly introduce myself, and Rutger will also introduce himself. And then after that, I'm going to add a mentee into the chat, and it will come up on the screen as well. So hopefully, if I put this in the chat, and it's a good way to test that the chat function is working. So if you want to put in the chat function, just say hi, just want to test it. It's nice to see that you're joining us here today, and we want to make sure that you can interact because this session is for you. So any questions that you have, please actively participate. And it's nice to see some familiar names coming in and saying hi. So please do participate. And also write any questions that you have in the chat. So we will try and address as many questions as we can. We've got a short space of time. This is a 45-minute webinar. I'll be strict with time. So 45 minutes past the hour, we will be stopping, but we'll take note of any questions if we haven't addressed them. I will try and interject and ask those questions to Rutger at an appropriate time during the session. Your line should be muting, but if for some reason it isn't, then please do make sure it is muted. All webinars are being recorded. Please don't let that prevent you from participating. Your names won't be in the chat. You won't be able to see that on the recording, and I won't mention any names when I'm answering any questions. If you have any issues or any questions, you can email emarketing@icw.io, and I can put that in the chat if anybody wants that chat. Okay, for those of you that have been on these sessions before, you're probably a little bit bored of seeing me, but I'll very, very quickly introduce myself. So I'm Geraldine Koch. If I've never met you before, it's so exciting to meet you. And if I'm seeing you again, then thank you so much for coming back to these webinars. I've been working in product safety for 20 years, done lots of training sessions, but I really enjoy doing training sessions with other people, especially people like Rutger, who are awesome. And I'm sure you'll agree with me by the end of this session. I've worked on many different activities, such as the technical author of some British standards. I work with projects that are EU-based, so on Speak, which is an awesome tool. I highly recommend having a look at that. And also CAST projects. And then also most recently, which is really exciting, on a training certification, the Business Certificate of Competency in Product Safety, which we're starting our second cohort this week. So I'm doing lots of stuff with product safety and also working with the amazing ICW team on their amazing solutions and platforms. And if you have any questions about that, then please do let us know. Okay, so I've put a Menti in the chat. Sometimes Menti doesn't work, so I'm just going to prepare you with that just in case. And if it doesn't, then please do put it in the chat. If you don't want to use Menti, if you're not familiar with it, maybe you don't have a phone next to you, or you don't want to search on the internet, the Menti website, we'd really appreciate it if you do. How you use Menti is, I can see somebody's already put it in there. It's very exciting. On the side of me, I can see. That's great. You scan the QR code. So you just open the camera on your phone, scan the QR code. It should bring you directly into Menti. It's working, so I'm super excited. If not, you can join by using the web link, which I put in the chat, which hopefully those of you that joined after I put it in can access that too. Or you can go to menti.com and use the code that's on the screen. It's 18524278. And we've just got two questions for you really quickly. Is how much do you know about the GPSR? Because we want to try and get an understanding on pitching this for the next 45 minutes. Is it nothing, got no idea whatsoever? Is it a basic understanding, or is it fully prepared? I'm going to ask Rutger to guess what he thinks the majority of people as well when he comes on in a moment. But that's the first question. Then the next question that we have, and hopefully it should come up, is what are your thoughts? So this is just a word cloud, a general question. Do you have any thoughts, specific queries on the GPSR? Of course, in the chat, we can see your name if you want to maybe be a bit more anonymous. If you put it in Menti, we can't see who you are. So please do remember that. If you put a question in Menti, we won't be able to come back to you if we don't get time to answer that today because it's anonymous. So please do put any questions in the chat if you want us to follow up with you. But it's just really useful to have that on the side so we can get an understanding of your general thoughts on the GPSR. Okay, while we're waiting for you to put some of those answers and think about that in the Menti, over to you, Rutger, to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, and Geraldine, for for your introduction, and thank you to the participants to join this this webinar. Just a quick introduction for those who don't know me. I am a lawyer by education. I have more than 20 years of legal experience. I have been former head of legal at Shimano Europe for a very long time. So I've been an in-house counsel there. So also familiar with consumer products. And I founded Recall Desk already more than 3 years ago. And with Recall Desk, we help basically in two areas. What can you do to prevent a recall, and we help companies who are facing a recall or a potential recall. We are a proud partner of the World Federation of the Sporting Goods Industry. I am a writer and contributor for Bike Europe magazine, and also Sporting Goods Intelligence Europe, and also Eyewear Intelligence. And I'm a member of several NEN standard committees. NEN is the Dutch standardization body. Back to the Menti results, Geraldine, or?
Yeah, I'll just quickly let you know so you get an idea. So
Okay.
how many do you think? Do you think we're looking at mainly people that have no idea or a basic understanding, or do you have no idea? Can you guess?
I would guess basic understanding, majority.
Yes, you are
Yeah.
right. So about 70% basic understanding, and then a few are saying nothing, and then a few are saying fully prepared. I'm really intrigued, actually. I think we could learn from them how they're fully prepared.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's good to know. That's
And then
very good to know.
the thoughts about the GPSR. So just a few comments that came in. It's important, it's interesting, uncertainty, complicated, sensible, not well understood. So a bit of kind of a mix there. People say not well understood, but complicated and comprehensive, a good update. Electronic address. I love that. That's just thrown in there because that's definitely something you're going to cover, right? But some interesting thoughts. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. That's appreciated. Oh, all right. Let's continue then. So the agenda for today. Actually, we made this agenda, I think, already some time ago, and we planned this webinar also some time ago. Yeah, so we thought about this agenda. So the overview of the main highlights of the GPSR, including update on implementation, update on implementing and delegated acts, and the latest news on guidelines. Well, to start with the last one, unfortunately, the guidelines have not been published yet. We really hope that it would already be published in September prior to this webinar, to make this webinar even more valuable than it already is. But unfortunately, yeah, we're still waiting. So yeah, to start with that. Then on the timeline of the General Product Safety regulation, the directive will be replaced by the regulation. The text has been approved last year already, 25th of April, and it will be applicable as of the 13th of December this year. The last time, or last year in May, I think it was May 2023, Geraldine, that we did the first webinar on GPSR. So already almost 1.5 years passed by. So it is interesting to see if, compared to that presentation, we have some additional information to share or new information to share. I started that presentation also with this slide, just to give a very quick idea in a simplified way of the legal framework for product safety of consumer goods in the EU. So if you sell a consumer good, typically the first thing you would do is to look for specific union harmonization legislation, if that is applicable to your product, and that could be several pieces of law that are applicable to your product. In extension to that, also look if there are any safety standards, ideally harmonized standards applicable that can help you to test your product in order to make sure that it meets the essential requirements of the specific union harmonization legislation. However, For risks or other conditions that are not covered by specific union harmonization legislation, we still have the General Product Safety Directive in place. So it is regarded as a so-called safety net, a legal safety net. However, if your product is not covered by specific union harmonization legislation, you're only dealing basically with the General Product Safety Directive. So that is, in very short, how that legal framework looks like in the EU. So we already discussed the directive will be replaced by a regulation. So what does that mean? Well, directives typically have to be transposed into national law of each member state, whereas a regulation does not need to be transposed. It is already applicable directly in each member state. So you don't need member states to transpose a directive or this regulation into national law of each member state, which also helps the level of harmonization, because typically directives give a little bit of room to maneuver. So member states are allowed to change a little bit here and there, which is not really helping the level of harmonization, but this is not possible if it's a regulation. So that is good to know. The scope, if you look at the General Product Safety Regulation, is really what is remarkable is that it's quite detailed, and there are quite some specific provisions in there. Whereas, the name it's supposed to be a general regulation. Well, it's not so general, actually. If you really look well at this piece of law, it is rather specific, which is remarkable. And also good to know, if interesting for you, the regulation will also cover the food imitation products, and therefore repeal the directive that is currently applicable to food imitation products. Yeah, in terms of position, I call it a safety net plus for the reasons that I just explained. It is rather specific, and even if your product is covered by specific union legislation, harmonized legislation, there are still quite some sections in the regulation that apply to your product regardless of union legislation. And of course, I will explain that in more detail further on in this webinar, but I think that is really important to know, and why this regulation is, I call it a safety net plus. The GPSR is going mental. Why? Under the GPSR, the term product safety takes on a much broader meaning and includes health. And the GPSR refers in the recitals to the WHO's definition of health. And they define health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So this is quite important, and really a game changer to use those words. Because what does it mean? For example, think of children who use mobile phones or games. These products or services can be addictive to children. There's a lot of scientific evidence for that. And I think the General Product Safety Regulation can be used as a legal basis to do something, to include those products into the scope of the General Product Safety Regulation. And actually, companies that are offering such kind of products and services really need to think about, also in their risk assessment, if their product could be a risk for the health of their customers. And that risk assessment should then include also mental and social well-being. So it's a game changer. There is a lot more attention to risk assessment in the Product Safety Regulation as compared to the directive. I have to say it's a safety net, because the article that is covering this is in a section that is not applicable if your product is covered by specific union harmonized legislation. But still, if it doesn't, then this becomes important, and you have to do a risk analysis. So I get a lot of questions from clients like, do I have to do a risk analysis now? Well, Yes. But if your product is already covered by specific union legislation, you're already supposed to do a risk assessment in most cases. So in that sense, it's not really new. But if your product is only covered by the General Product Safety Directive, and then soon will be covered by the regulation, yes, then this will be something new for you. You have to do this risk analysis and draw up technical documentation, just like you have to do for example, CE marked products, right? And also here, as I already mentioned, you should also consider mental health. Of course, it depends on the type of product and the type of risks that are related to your product. But yeah, you really have to consider mental health now as well, if applicable.
If you don't mind,
Sure.
a question, sorry, that's come in, and I think to address at that point, because I don't think we're going to address it later on, is about the methodology. And if I may give my opinion, and you can interject, but there is no methodology, right, for doing this risk assessment. There's post-risk assessment. So we've got decision 2019-417, but in terms of this, there is no template or method.
No, that's correct. And there are methods. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are ISO standards that can help you, and depending on the type of product, you can try and find the methodology that suits your product best, right? So it really depends on the complexity of your product and the type of risk. So yeah, correct.
Yeah, and I think toys is a good, with the safety assessment process that you were supposed to be doing for toys, that's probably a good start in my opinion in that. But yeah. Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. So then the next one, online platforms as the new market surveillance authority. So there's a completely new section included in this regulation, which is not included in the current directive. And providers of online platforms like Amazon and the like, they must ensure through a battery of due diligence obligations that traders using their platform only sell products that comply with applicable laws and regulations. And I'm sure there are participants in this webinar that already experience this because they sell through Amazon or similar platforms, and Amazon is really taking a lot of action to comply and meet these new conditions of the General Product Safety regulation. So it will probably not be new to many of you, but yeah. So anyway, if traders want to sell their products via Amazon or the like, they should be in control of their product compliance and safety processes. And in case of repeated non-compliance, pursuant to the GPSR, providers of online platform will have to suspend their services to this trader until further notice. So it's really important that as a trader making use of these platforms, your product safety processes should be in order. Yeah, and basically, or de facto, this makes providers of online platforms a kind of new or extra gatekeeper when it comes to product compliance and safety, in my opinion. This is if you are not used to dealing with union harmonization legislation like and CE marking, this could be new to you, and I get a lot of questions about this topic. So I am spending a little bit more time on this topic, specifically for irrelevant for companies that are based outside the EU selling into the EU. So a product covered by this regulation shall not be placed on the market unless there is an economic operator established in the union. And that economic operator is then called the responsible person. So that means companies that are established outside the EU can no longer sell directly to consumers in the EU without having a responsible person established in the EU. And that responsible person will be the person or company or an economic operator to be addressed if products do not comply with EU legislation. So what are economic operators? That could be a manufacturer or the authorized representative, the importer, the distributor, or a fulfillment service provider. Yeah, or any other natural legal person, blah, blah. I will not go into that detail, but typically you're looking at manufacturer, authorized representative, importer, distributor, or fulfillment service provider. A fulfillment service provider is an economic operator that has at least two of the following services: warehousing, packaging, addressing and dispatching without having ownership of the products involved, excluding postal services. What does that mean in practice? So I made a couple of slides that is showing situations. So let's assume we have a manufacturer in the USA selling directly to consumers, but there is no economic operator established in the EU. As of the 13th of December 2024, that this manufacturer is no longer allowed to sell to consumers. And I get a lot of questions about this topic. So how to deal with that? So if you want to solve that issue, you could appoint a so-called authorized representative. And then if you have appointed an authorized representative, and an authorized representative operates on the basis of a mandate given by the manufacturer, also the details of both the manufacturer but also the authorized representative should be on the product or in the packaging. So that is important to know. If you work with a fulfillment service provider, then, as I explained in one of the previous slides, this fulfillment service provider becomes the responsible person, whether this fulfillment provider likes it or not. So by law, if the fulfillment service provider meets the conditions of being a fulfillment service provider, it is responsible, and that is only in the absence of other economic operators. And then also the details, again, of the manufacturer and the FSP should be on the product or in the packaging. So I think this is a challenge for a company like Amazon. And I try to get some more feedback from them how they are dealing with this, but that is difficult. But I think this is a challenge for them, to be honest, for the similar platforms. This is a situation that you see a lot also with clients of mine. So you have a manufacturer again in the USA, and this manufacturer is selling its product to a variety of different economic operators, right? So there can be distributors in various member states in the EU. They also sell directly to retailers wherever they are based in the EU. By law, if these distributors and dealers are importing that product straight from the US, from the manufacturer, and there is no importer in between, these distributors and retailers are considered importers by law. And that is for some clients rather new, because then all these importers have to put their name and detail on the product as well, and even the retailers actually. So that is challenging, and a lot of companies are struggling how to deal with this. And I do not have a solution for that. I know how some of my clients are dealing with that, so I'm happy to chat and brainstorm with participants if they are if they like. So happy to do that. But just to know you're not alone. There are other clients struggling with this as well. And then as an importer, as I mentioned here, you're actually a quasi-manufacturer. So the requirements that apply to a manufacturer are almost similar as if you were an importer. So be aware of that. So one of the possible solutions could be, but of course it should fit your organization and your resources, obviously, is to appoint only one importer in the EU who would basically import the products from the US and then distribute those products further on in the supply chain. And this importer could of course be a third party, but you could also establish your own company in one of the member states and then have that let that company be your official importer and have the details of that importer on your packaging. Easier said than done for a lot of clients. So just for you that I'm aware of that. But I thought it was good to show these slides and just some scenarios to put things into context. Yeah, on the implementation. How to implement this, right, in practice. So get a lot of questions like, yeah, should we already label all these products with the names of all the importers in the EU? And how about sharing sensitive information with our customers who could also be your competitors? You're actually required to share the technical documentation with importers. So yeah, and the answer is not easy to that, right? Yeah, by law, and I checked this with the Dutch authority, Market Surveillance Authority, who then checked this with Brussels, and it's not an official legal advice, but I asked them, is this really how we should interpret the law? For example, if the manufacturer in the US would appoint parallel or next to having all these importers in the EU, if it would also appoint an authorized representative, would those importers then be relieved from their duty to put their name and address on the packaging, et cetera, et cetera? And the answer was no, because the obligations for importers go a lot further than those of an authorized representative. So yeah, unfortunately, I would say it's not a very practical approach. Hopefully the guidelines give a little bit more clarity and hopefully a bit more room to maneuver here. But yeah, I thought in terms of updates on implementation, I thought it was good to share this with you. And then there is another complicating factor here. There is a proposal of a new EU product liability directive, and the economic operators that are covered by that directive are more or less the same and includes the authorized representative, and that is new. So this product liability directive introduces the authorized representative as an economic operator who falls under the scope of the product liability directive. In other words, if your product is causing an accident and you have an authorized representative in the EU, that authorized representative can be held liable for that accident, which goes pretty far because your authorized representative has nothing to do with the product design whatsoever. And there's been a lot of debate about this, but it's there, it's in the law. Although it's still a proposal, it is close at being approved and final. So I don't expect this to be deleted from the directive. Hopefully the expected guidance from the Commission will clarify what is the correct interpretation in terms of the responsible person. But that will not help in terms of the product liability directive. So it is a complicating factor. In my opinion. Checking the time quickly. Okay, yeah, I think we're still good. Then obligations in case of online sales. So the offer of products, the online offer, shall indicate, among others, where the manufacturer is not established in the EU, the name, postal, and electronic address of the responsible person in the EU, plus warning or safety information. But looking at the second bullet point, so the details of the responsible person in the EU, this is taken from a Dutch platform, bol.com, pretty famous and big one in the Netherlands. You can see here, and I just took a product that I can't even remember, but here it says the address of the responsible economic operator in the EU, and then it says, yes, this information will follow shortly. So they are already anticipating on the GPSR. But if I also found this one on Amazon, they are already meeting this requirement. Sorry, it's in Dutch, but and I just took a product, I can't even remember, I think a coffee machine or something. So it's not only covered by the General Product Safety Regulation, but here you can see how this would look like, right? So the responsible person, it says, and then you see, yeah, some entity somewhere in Spain. But just to give you an idea of, okay, this is not only like theory, this is not only a legal text somewhere in a regulation. No, this is actually happening. And yeah, I mean, who is not dealing with Amazon, right? So this is reality, and we have to be prepared for it. Then a lot of questions about labeling requirements. Yes, there are labeling requirements in the GPSR. So manufacturers shall ensure that their product bear a type, batch, or serial number, etc., etc. Manufacturers and importers shall indicate their name, their registered trade name, registered trademark, postal, electronic address, etc., on the product or in the packaging or on the packaging. Because look at the third one, where the size of or nature of the product does not allow it, the required information is provided on the packaging or in a document accompanying the product. Then a lot of questions about what is electronic address. So we took this from a FAQ between Senelec and the European Commission. It's not an official legal statement, but at least I think it helps you interpret the term electronic address. So the electronic address should allow for a direct contact of the manufacturer by the consumers. It can be an email address or, for example, a direct contact form on a website. A static website as such is not sufficient. Again, it's not an official legal advice or statement, but since this is coming from the EU Commission, I think it's wise to follow this approach. But again, we can also wait for the guidelines and hope that they are clarifying this term in there as well. Having said that, this is not entirely new. If you look at the current directive, it actually says that the measures referred to in the third subparagraph, blah, 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 shall include, for example, an indication by means of the product or its packaging of the identity and details of the producer and the product reference, or where applicable, the batch of products to which it belongs, etc., etc. So the phenomenon of putting your details on the packaging or your product is not entirely new in the GPSR. So just for you to be aware. We had some questions also prior to this webinar. I hope by this that I answered that question. If not, feel free to chat or to contact either Geraldine or myself after the webinar. And then in terms of these contact details, I get a lot of questions like, yeah, can we not just use a QR code which would then, take people to our contact details? Unfortunately, that is not possible, at least not as an exclusive means. You can use it in addition, but it cannot replace the obligation to put your name, details, badge, serial number, what have you, on either the product and or the packaging or in the packaging. So I think that is also important to understand. It could be that there is specific union legislation, harmonized legislation that allows for a QR code as the single means. That could be the case. If so, then that would overrule basically this condition in the GPSR. Sorry. Yeah, and then this, interestingly, this is also new. So there is an obligation to report accidents under the GPSR. I think also Geraldine will be very happy about this. I think, yeah, you are very interested in this obligation. And yes, indeed, it is an obligation for manufacturers to report without undue delay accidents caused by products they have placed on the market. And yeah, the text of the GPSR is a little bit vague. I think I was a bit more clear 1.5 years ago in my presentation, where I thought, it's only in case of death or serious adverse effects. I had some discussions afterwards with, and then I had another look. I still believe my interpretation is correct, but the text is not entirely clear. So also here, I think the expected guidance from the Commission may clarify whether indeed my interpretation is correct, meaning that only incidents resulting in death or serious adverse effects on health and safety have to be reported. And then reported where? Reported in the member state where the accident actually occurred. And also economic operators like importers, but also providers of online platforms have a critical role here to play, because if they are aware of any accidents, they are also expected to report it, unless the manufacturer is already doing that in their place. But so it's important. I think this is also really a game changer, to be honest. Internal product safety process, also I think a topic close to Geraldine's heart. So the GPSR is introducing internal product safety processes. If you read the recital, it says it's compulsory. However, actually, the specific article is included in a section that is not or that is excluded, not applicable if your product is already covered by harmonized legislation. So it's a bit strange to call it compulsory in your recitals and then include it in a section that is not applicable if your product is covered by harmonized legislation. So I call it here again. It's compulsory, but as a safety net. And of course, then the question is how to do that, how to implement internal product safety process if you're not familiar with that. Also here, you do not have to reinvent the wheel. There are ISO standards that can help you. There's 10377 and 10393. I also know that the Dutch authority is working with 37301. I am more in favor of 10377 and 10393 because the other one is a bit more high level, whereas the 10377 is really like a hands-on standard that can really help you. Whether you're a big or a small company, doesn't matter. Then in the UK, obviously, you have PAS 7050 and PAS 7100, and Geraldine can tell a lot about it, but you can compare those standards with the 10377 and 10393. And so if you're interested, reach out to either Geraldine or myself. But you're not alone there, right? You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, and I just can I mention a few things. We've had a lot of questions come in, but I don't want to interrupt you too much, Rutger. I'll let you get through the slides. I'll put a link in the chat for PAS 7050 and 7100, which are free to download. And also, what I think is quite interesting is you should do an almost risk assessment on all of these clauses, because some of these things, there's not even the facilities to be able to execute them, if that makes sense. So, if you have to report to the Commission about accidents, like where do you do it? How do you do it? So we are really waiting for further guidance, and we don't have any information on when those guidance, documents are expected. And I would say the same for safety processes. I think it's going to be very difficult for market surveillance officers to regulate this, and check up on this. So I think hopefully it's not panicking everyone too much, but there are a lot of resources out there that Rutger is alluding to.
Yeah, thanks, Geraldine. That's really helpful. Also mindful of the time. So in case of a recall, the GPSR is stipulating that you should offer at least 2 remedies to consumers. At least 2 of the following: repair, replacement, or a refund. And you are allowed to only offer 1 remedy if the other remedies are impossible or disproportionate. Of course, then the question is, what is disproportionate? What is impossible? Hopefully the guidance will say something about it, but otherwise I would just use common sense, right? And also think about the environment, for example. If a product can be repaired easily, why recall it and destroy the product, right? That doesn't make any sense. And of course, also the value of the product is important. I didn't include that in the other presentation 1.5 years ago, but I thought I also thought perhaps good to include it here. So where economic operators and providers of online marketplaces have in place product registration systems or customer loyalty programs, they shall offer the possibility to their customers to provide separate contact details only for safety-related purposes. So this is something, I think you should be aware of. If you have those systems in place or programs in place, this is what you're expected to do. So just for you to know. Nothing more to add to it, but I thought it was good to highlight this, right? Beware of the snag. This is my really my thing, and I had discussions about this with the European Commission on this, because if you really read the regulation well, then it says 2 things. First, it says in the event of a recall, the consumer must be instructed to immediately stop using the affected product. But also the regulation says that in addition, in the event of a recall, the economic operator must collect the unsafe products from the consumer if it's not portable. So in terms of how to implement this in practice, right? You can think of quite some products where this makes sense, right? If it's a refrigerator or a washing machine or whatever. But how about a car? And you may not think so, but the GPSR is also applicable to cars. And these conditions are put in a section that is applicable regardless of whether the product is covered by specific union harmonization legislation. Of course, there is specific legislation in place for cars, but these conditions are put in a section that also apply to cars. So I had a very long discussion with the European Commission. I asked them, so to summarize that conclusion, it is basically my interpretation is correct, but this will for sure lead to difficulties in terms of implementation, right? I've never seen a car recall where the manufacturer would ask the consumer to stop using the car, and then the car would be collected from the consumer. And you can also think of other type of products like cargo bikes or what have you. So it will be interesting to see how this will work out in practice. Let's see. I see this as a big challenge. Then consumer complaints through the SafetyGate portal, which will be completely redesigned, if I understand correctly from the text of the GPSR. It will be a lot easier for consumers to submit complaints to authorities. Manufacturers will obviously therefore be more exposed. What, for example, if a consumer reports an accident, but the manufacturer doesn't? So that is really a situation that you should be mindful of, right? So we have, as of the 13th of December, the obligation that a manufacturer should report accidents. And if a manufacturer decides not to do it, or he forgets or whatever, but the consumer who suffered from that accident is reporting this, then yeah, obviously this may lead to a tricky situation. Then coming to the end almost, penalties, basically no change compared to the directive. So the member states are expected to have penalties in place, and these penalties are expected to play a significant deterrent effect for economic operators. If you look at recital 102, you see that the Commission will be watching the member states and the penalties and see how effective these penalties are. So perhaps in the future, the Commission may step in and adopt legislative proposal in relation to penalties. Let's see how that will develop. Then I promised to give you an update on the initiatives of implementing on delegated acts. I've checked it. There are some, not many. They are not, I think, really interesting for this webinar. I only want to highlight one, and that is that now there is a mandatory recall notice template that the European Commission is expecting you to use in case of a recall. I've also commented on this when this was still in the drafting phase. I highlighted that the stop use could be an issue. Yeah, for some reason they didn't listen to me. The stop use is in the template here, and you are actually supposed to use this template, right? So let's see how this will develop and how, I think there will be challenges. I also really don't like this template, but anyway, that's a matter of taste. Other than that, latest news on guidelines, still waiting. I already mentioned that in the beginning. They promised that it would be the guidance would be here this year. I also heard that it would be September. So we're still in September, so let's see. We will monitor that closely, obviously, but still waiting. Key takeouts. Yeah, the general product safety regulation will be relevant for all consumer products, even if covered by harmonized union law. I think that is a clear message that I hope I was able to give during this webinar. And I also think the general product safety regulation will be a game changer for companies selling consumer products in the EU. So be prepared, only a couple of months left. Don't panic, but yeah, be prepared, I would say. And yeah, I think that's it for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And just to summarize really quickly before everybody goes, hopefully before you leave, there will be a questionnaire that comes up. Please do fill this out. I'm actually going to put ICFSO, a link to ICFSO in the chat because Rick, I believe you're going to be there, right?
Yeah, I
so
will
too.
be there as well.
I'm going to be there. ICW will be there. So if you are at ICFSO, please do make sure you come by the stand and come and see us. I think you can log in as well. Maybe that's closed now, but this has been an amazing webinar, not only listening to you, Rutger, but all of the discussions that have been going on in the chat and people sharing information. It's been phenomenal. Apologies, we couldn't answer all of your questions. I think there's a product specific one, very specific and really long, and I couldn't really read all of it in one go. We will take a look at those and come back. Highly recommend any questions about GB. And a question came up about Northern Ireland, which I tend to avoid, to be brutally honest with you, but someone answered. So thank you so much. But yes, Northern Ireland should be having the general product safety regulation. As far as I'm aware, the specific legal enacting legislation hasn't been released yet, but in theory they should be. So Northern Ireland should, if you're selling in Northern Ireland, you should also be following the GPSR as well. Another question came out, which I want to ask really quickly before we close. I know we're running over by a couple of minutes. Is historical products. What do you think about historical products, Rutger? Do you feel that everyone now needs to go back and look at all their historical products, or just focus on now?
No, the key question there is if they are already placed on the market. So if the products are placed on the market, then you're good to go. But if not, and if you're able to influence that, because if they are somewhere in a bonded warehouse, make sure they are declared by custom, because then they are technically speaking and legally speaking placed on the market. Then you should be safe. So
yeah, that term placed on the market is key. Someone also asked about technical documentation, and I suggested there's no guidance, right? Unless I've missed something, there is no guidance on what under GPSR, but there is under the other legal framework, such as if you go to the Toy Safety Directive, you go to the annex, it lists what you would expect to see. So that's where I would recommend you go, is to the annex of Toy Safety Directive, for example, and use that as a starter. Okay. Lots of questions. We can see who they are in the chat. We promised to get back to you. And once again, thank you so much, Rutger. That was amazing. Really appreciate everyone else joining as well. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.